Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Liz Jackson, and I'm Executive Director of the Walnut Council and the Indiana Forestry and Woodland Owners Association. Also co-sponsoring this event is the National Woodland Owners Association, and they're represented by Executive Director Mark McGallis. He'll be moderating later in the session. We're pleased to have you join us today. We have 127 participants on the call. There have been a variety of opportunities in the last many years for landowners to participate in carbon markets, but often they've had a high barrier to entry, either required large acreages or cost a lot of money to join. Many of you might be familiar with SilviaTerra's programs that they've been offering in the Southeast and the Northeast over the last year. But now they recently changed their name to NCX, and starting this month, they're offering signups across the US. This webinar isn't an endorsement of the NCX program, but we wanted to learn more about it because it is a new opportunity for you as a landowner to make annual revenue. Carbon markets are rapidly evolving and have sometimes been called the Wild West because of all the changes that are happening. Congress in many states are considering legislation that will lead to further changes in carbon programs and new programs in the future, which gives landowners a variety of new opportunities to consider and weigh before enrolling in a program. Selling carbon credits might not be a good fit for every landowner, but after hearing about this, you might consider whether it's the right match for your property and you. Before we start the presentation, note we are recording it and we'll send a link to participants in a few days with the recording link. If you're interested in the SAF credit, we'll be documenting your attendance and we'll forward that on to SAF. If you have questions during the talk, feel free to put those in the Q&A, not in the chat, and we will moderate those at the end of the presentation. Alex McIntosh was not able to join us today due to a conflict, and he sent his regrets and one of his team members. I'm pleased to introduce you to Lillian Hogan. She's a Customer Success Manager for the Landowner Success team at NCX. Lillian is one of the newest members of the team, but brings skills from her previous experience as a Senior Program Manager for an environmental company and her educational background in agricultural economics from Purdue University. Boiler up. She currently resides in Indianapolis. Lillian's going to tell us more about the new sign up and how landowners can participate. I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Liz. I'm thrilled to be here. Happy to share more information about NCX, who we are as a company, and our natural capital exchange program. I have a slide deck that I'm going to share. Liz, it looks like there may be it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, I made you a co-host, see if that works.
Perfect. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Perfect. All right, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lillian Hogan, as Liz mentioned. I am a Customer Success Manager for NCX. I'm here to talk a little bit about who we are as an organization, our Natural Capital Exchange program, and how it's advantageous to both landowners and consulting foresters alike. Before we start, I would like to kick it off by thanking Liz and Mark, who both graciously offered to host this webinar and monitor the Q&A. I do anticipate we will have about 30 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer any questions that the group has posed. All right, jumping in. Shared on this page is the agenda for today's meeting. As I mentioned, I'm thrilled to be here and to have the opportunity to speak to you all. We will start by covering how we started and how we've grown to be NCX. We'll then jump into details of our program, what sets us apart from other voluntary carbon credit programs, and then follow that up with an overview of our enrollment process. I'll then spend a few minutes answering some frequently asked questions that we've received from landowners in the past, and then, as mentioned, we will open it up to Q&A from the audience. Here's an image of the NCX team. We have actually grown over the past week and most recently added another customer success manager to the Landowner Success team that I'm part of. Our newest member is Catherine Morse, and if you reach out to us via email, you may interact with her in the coming weeks. We are a dedicated team of passionate individuals and experts who appreciate the value of forests and other ecosystems and want to be part of building a program that provides an alternative solution to landowners who own and manage forests. Our company was co-founded in 2010 by Zach Parissa and Max Nova, our CEO and COO, who attended Yale together. There were a few initial product launches of similar design and scope to what we now call BaseMap. We are the first company to use remote sensing and AI to map out every acre of every forest across the continental US. Our BaseMap is updated annually, as you can see in this last bullet. However, our data sciences team is diligently working on updating that tool more frequently as we expand our program. Our Natural Capital Exchange program, which is where the acronym NCX comes from, uses BaseMap as part of our assessments. Our Natural Capital Exchange program was designed to create a market for every landowner, regardless of size, in every corner of the country and eventually the world, to be paid for all of the natural capital on their land. Like any company, though, you've got to start somewhere, and we're starting with forest carbon. We conducted our pilot program in 2019 in Pennsylvania. We then expanded to the Southeast states for our 2021 B launch, which happened earlier this year in April. And our 21C program, which we just recently closed, was available to landowners in 16 states that included some of the Northeast as well as the Lake states. Our cycles really align with the seasons. So the enrollment period for our 21D cycle can be also referred to as our fall cycle. I am excited to announce that our 21D program is available to all landowners across the continental US. Our long-term goal as a company is to expand into other ecosystems and provide landowners with a variety of capital that they can be paid for developing or maintaining. Our current technology and data sets allow us to evaluate a landowner's business as usual model. Sometimes this is referred to as BAU. We are incentivizing landowners to defer timber harvest for 1 year. That equates to a change in that landowner's business as usual model. The 1 year deferral is equivalent or equals more carbon on the landscape. As I mentioned, we have run a few cycles to date. This slide provides an overview of participation from both our 21B and our 21C cycles. As you can see, there's been tremendous increase in both engagement and participation, and we are thrilled to interact with even more landowners as part of our 21D enrollment. To share a few other statistics that are not highlighted on this page, landowners as small as 20 acres have been assessed as eligible, meaning they have enough eligible carbon on their property to participate. 45% of assessed properties in 21C were under 500 acres. So this program was designed specifically with smaller family forest landowners at the heart of the conversation. The smallest eligible participant who submitted a bid was 25 acres, which again just coincides with our goal of NCX to be available to all landowners regardless of size. We are ecstatic to see the impact we're able to achieve through this deliberate design of NCX. This slide highlights 3 key characteristics of our program that we feel set us apart from other voluntary carbon credit programs. I've touched on some of these earlier in the presentation, but to reiterate those highlights, we think set us apart are annual contract terms, no enrollment or participation fees for landowners, and no minimum acreage requirements. This gives us the opportunity to interact with landowners who may have previously been excluded from other carbon credit programs. We want to continue to hear from landowners to ensure our program has the biggest impact on the largest audience. With family forest owners making up 39% of the total forest land in the US, more than any other ownership group, your feedback and engagement is of special importance to us. Now we'll jump into the enrollment process. I usually break it down into 3 primary groupings: enrollment, assessment, and seller agreement. But the first step, the enrollment process, usually takes 5 to 10 minutes. On this slide, you will see an overview of the process, but I'll go into a bit more detail and share a short video that covers one way you can provide property information in the coming slides. To start, you will create an account on our website. On this slide, you will see a link to our landowner homepage, landowners.ncx.com. Once you've created an account, you'll provide some general contact information to include name, phone number, email address, things like that. You'll then provide property information. This can be a specific address, like a street address, if applicable to your property, or you can provide county and state information depending on your unique setup. I do want to call out that one of our program requirements is that landowners must enroll all of the property under their ownership. This helps maintain the integrity of our program while minimizing any potential leakage. As part of the enrollment process, you will have an opportunity to add any legal entity names if your property resides under an LLC or a trust, for example, as well as providing contact information for the consulting forester that you work with. We do highly encourage landowners to work with a consulting forester for best timber management practices. Once you've provided this information, you'll be taken to our mapping tool where you'll have 3 options to identify your property. This is a quick video that shows one way you can use our mapping tool to identify property boundaries. To provide some context before hitting play, you'll see here that we entered Boone, Michigan, USA, to the search box at the top. You could also enter a street address, if applicable, to hone in on the exact parcel that aligns with your property. However, county or city and state information would suffice. In this example, we'll show you how to use the Select Parcels feature, but you could also use Draw Shapes, this button just below. It has the same functionality, but allows you to draw specific shapes if your property ownership has changed or the county records that we reference are not 100% accurate for whatever reason. The third option for entering property information is to upload shape files. You'll see this hyperlink here that says upload here. If you have shape files, you can click that hyperlink, drag and drop all of the necessary files, and then upload those that way. Going that route will bypass the mapping tool entirely. I'm going to just slow this down a little bit. All right, so once you've identified the general area where your property resides, you'll select parcels. You'll click that Select Parcels button on the left side of the web page. Doing so will overlay public county data to our mapping tool to help you identify your specific parcel or parcels. Once identified, you can click on the corresponding parcels. You'll see in this video that after you click them, they change yellow. Once all of your property has been identified, you will click the Add Property button in the top left corner. You'll see then the color changes from yellow to blue. That's how you'll know that the property that you selected has been submitted. Once you click Save and Continue, you will be taken to the last page of our enrollment process. Here you will see 3 checkboxes that you'll need to click into before you can click the Request Eligibility Assessment. Clicking into those 3 checkboxes certifies your agreement with each statement. The first one is that your property boundaries are accurate and represent your entire land holdings. The second is that you've reviewed some documents that we have available to landowners. And the third is you requesting this eligibility assessment that we do. Once you've completed those steps, that will be the formal handoff to NCX, where we will use the information that you've provided, our technology and data to conduct our assessment. You'll be notified once the assessment is complete and that your eligibility report is available. This is a video that a landowner who participated in our 21B cycle helped us put together. He owns some property in Mississippi, and in this short video, he explains how he evaluated NCX and our program, the economics of participating, and concluded that it was a mutually beneficial relationship for both the environment and income from future harvests.
Well, going back to the economic side of it, one of the things that we looked at was the weighing the harvest, what return you would get on the harvest versus leaving this timber standing and generating income from that. And it also allows the decision that we also made is that with the income addition, that it will allow the timber not to be cut, which in turn allows it to grow longer. And each year the timber puts on volume. It does 2 things. It'll absorb more carbon and it'll also grow in timber value. So it's a win-win going back to yearly income and more valuable timber in the long run, because we are able to delay the harvest of the timber, therefore keep it growing. And we can benefit from the hunting. We lease it to the hunters. They can enjoy the hunting of the timber also, but that's what was the deciding factor in getting into the carbon program and the in-capture program.
So recognizing that every landowner's setup is a little bit unique, we just wanted to share one specific landowner's input on our program and why they chose to participate with us in a previous cycle.
Well,
on this slide, we'll cover some important dates for our fall 21D cycle. Enrollment is currently open for any landowner who wants to participate through early September. We will be distributing eligibility reports, which is the assessment that we conduct every Thursday starting mid-July. So if you were to enroll today, you would not receive an eligibility report from us until mid-July. That's just because we're wrapping up our 21D cycle, but starting mid-July, they will be distributed on a weekly basis every Thursday. Your eligibility report is not only emailed, but also available on your NCX dashboard. So if you create an account, you would be able to log in to your account and you would have your eligibility report displayed on that homepage. Your seller agreement, if you'd like to submit a bid or you choose to submit a bid for 21D, will also be available the same day your eligibility report is available and on the homepage of the NCX dashboard. So we try and have it laid out in a way that any relevant documents for landowners are at their disposal through our platform. The contract term for 21D will begin October 1st of 2021 and end September 30th of 2022. Once the contract period has finished, we will conduct our follow-up assessment to evaluate the delivery of the harvest deferral credits that were committed. Now that we've discussed who we are, our NCX program, and the overall enrollment process, I'd like to spend a few minutes answering some frequently asked questions before opening it up to Q&A. One of the most common questions we get from landowners is, how much will we get paid per acre? This is difficult to know without a landowner submitting their property information. Many factors influence financial potential, to include rotation age, species mix, and historical harvest activity, as well as local timber economics and any previous commitments such as conservation easements. To share a ballpark reference or a range, participating landowners with less than 200 acres who enrolled in our 21B cycle are likely to receive payments ranging from less than $100 to over $2,000. So there's a pretty wide range, and it depends on all of those factors that I previously mentioned. One other thing to note here as well is that enrollment is completely risk-free. So if, just out of curiosity, you want to enroll your property and get an assessment and then use our eligibility report to determine whether or not you want to submit a bid, that is perfectly acceptable. It's completely risk-free. Another frequently asked question is, if a landowner needs to enroll all of the property under their ownership, does that mean they're required to defer harvests on all of their acres? No, they're not. Landowners are not required to bid their maximum volume of eligible carbon. You, as a landowner, are able to submit volumes that work best for you. For example, if you have a scheduled thinning or timber sale that can continue as planned, you would just need to reduce your bid volume or the amount of harvest deferral credits you bid accordingly. There is a formula that we have shared with landowners as guidance in the past. That is that one harvest deferral credit is equivalent to about 25 green tons of pine or 20 green tons of mixed hardwood. So if you have a planned thinning and can forecast the estimated volume reduction, you can then use that formula to determine how many harvest deferral credits you'll want to reduce your bid by. Another question that we get pretty frequently is, how much should a landowner charge for their deferral credits? One of the unique aspects of our program is that by completing a bid in the seller agreement, landowners choose the price at which they're willing to supply carbon to the market. Landowners can choose to submit multiple volume and price pairings when completing the seller agreement. However, only one pairing will be accepted. So you have the option as a landowner to say, I'm willing to sell this many HDCs at this dollar amount. We also have published a blog that includes a very specific formula on how you as a landowner can calculate what bid price is best for you based on estimated harvest revenue, a discount rate, and the total number of harvest deferral credits you have eligible. So this is certainly something that we can help landowners determine, but ultimately you have the flexibility to choose the price that works best for you. So who are our buyers? We have seen really strong demand from both Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies who have big sustainability targets. These are US-based firms who want to participate in the voluntary carbon credit market. Microsoft, for example, was a major buyer for our 21B cycle, and we are working with a handful of other companies finalizing contracts now. We recognize that certification is an important next step and are working with Verra, a third-party standards institute, on verifying our methodology. How should consulting foresters engage with the program? Most of the foresters we've worked with have been handling NCX in ways similar to how they would handle a timber sale, meaning the forester works with their client to come to an agreeable revenue sharing arrangement for the services provided by the forester. I mentioned this earlier, but do just want to reiterate it. We do highly encourage landowners to work with consulting foresters. We recognize the importance of their expertise in timber management practices and the relationship that they build with their clients. As far as creating an account for your clients, if you are a consulting forester, there are a few options. Choice A would be to work with the landowner to create a new email address that both of you have access to. If you need recommendations for how to do this, please email us. We have some suggestions, and I have included our landowner email at the end of this presentation. So if you are a consulting forester and you want more information about how to enroll multiple clients, please don't hesitate to contact us and we can provide some more information there. The second option would be to reach out to the landowner you would be or you would like to represent and ask for permission to use their email address to create an account and enroll on their behalf. The third option, if you are representing one landowner, is you may use your own email address to set up the account on their behalf. So we have a few options for consulting foresters as far as how to manage accounts on behalf of their clients. How are natural disasters handled? If a natural disturbance occurs during the 1-year performance period, and this results in a landowner not meeting their deferral commitments, no payments would be made for the associated harvest deferral credits that were bid. Landowners will not be penalized further and will not be barred from future participation in NCX cycles. So worst case scenario, if a natural disaster did occur and impacted your property and your ability to deliver on the harvest deferral credits you previously bid, worst case scenario is you wouldn't be paid, but nothing beyond that would happen. The last question in this FAQ section is, can you re-enroll every year? Absolutely. Payments will be issued following the second assessment that we do at the end of the contract period. We expect those payments to be distributed between 30 and 60 days after the cycle has ended. However, we would be thrilled to have landowners re-enroll in subsequent cycles. So now that I've covered some of the most frequently asked questions, I'd like to open it up to Q&A from the group. As I mentioned, I've listed our landowners mailbox, that email address on this page. So if you have any specific questions about your property, or if you'd like to contact us directly, you can do so by reaching out to us via email. Mark, do you have any questions from participants that you would like to pose to the group?
I certainly would. And if you can hear me, I'll go slowly. We've got about 10, now 13 in the Q&A. So
Great.
Catch your breath, maybe get a drink. And I'll start from the bottom, and hopefully that will go a little smoother. So There are a couple of questions related to, many states have a forest taxation program specific to lands that are managed for timber and the like. And to your knowledge, the curiosity is, will this impact their eligibility to those programs? In a sense, if they have a harvest plan and they defer it for a year. Not that you're an expert in 50 states, but have you come across this?
So I have come across this when interacting with some landowners who wanted to participate in our 21C cycle. Generally, the tax programs do not require any kind of timber harvesting. So as long as the timber is not already being restricted through those tax programs, that will have no impact on their eligibility to participate.
Very good, very good. So I have the next one. Actually, they come in different orders, so we'll go see how it goes.
Okay.
This one is a process question about the buying and reselling of those credits. The units that you talked about, either 25 tons of pine or 20 tons of hardwood. Why does your company buy and resell to corporations versus representing the landowner as a broker per se?
Can you say that one more time? Why does our program?
I think the question boils down to why are you a reseller versus representing the landowner as a broker on these credits?
So the way our program is designed is the landowner is working with NCX to defer harvest. So the seller agreement actually stipulates that their agreement is with us, and then we work with the corporations directly. Sometimes there are corporations who want to purchase 10,000 credits that we would be responsible for sourcing, potentially through multiple landowners. So we actually put ourselves at the center of that conversation in managing the relationship with the corporations as well as with the landowners directly.
So in a sense, you are brokering as it is, right? You just take on the risk.
Yeah, and that's exactly right, Mark. We take on the risk. If a landowner, for example, bids 100 harvest deferral credits and they're not able to deliver on those, NCX is then still going to be responsible for sourcing those credits from other landowners or through other means. So yeah, we are taking on that risk, but ultimately we are facilitating the conversations between the corporations and NCX, and then NCX and the landowners.
The next one comes from John, and it's a question about additionality. How are we creating that with just 1 year's deferral of a harvest? And are there any activities that are required during that year?
So there are no activities that are required during the year. Additionality is something that we get asked about pretty frequently. Additionality, as far as how it relates to our methodology, is evaluated based on our business as usual model. So by deferring harvest for 1 year, we're recognizing that the existing timber is going to grow in volume over that year. And through the year that the harvesting has been deferred, the additional carbon is being captured through the growth of those trees.
Okay, and there's a question that is so closely aligned to that. I think I'll ask it now. And it's from Kim. There's obviously a justification for how this system works. And could you provide the links of the studies that talks about that methodology?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a white paper that is, I believe, 30-ish pages that goes through a very detailed overview of our methodology and the RISE framework that we reference as far as how our program was designed. You can either reach out to us at landowners@ncx.com, and we can certainly provide you a copy of that. There's also an option on our webpage for you to request the white paper directly from our website.
Hopefully, here's one that's a little easier on you. Catch your breath. How are open lands handled in this enrollment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we require all property to be enrolled in our program. However, if there are pasture lands that do not have timber, they will not impact the number of harvest deferral credits that get assessed for the property as a whole. So we ask that all property be enrolled because, you know, one of our goals is to minimize potential leakage as much as possible. But if you have land that doesn't have any timber on it, you're not going to see any kind of impact on the number of harvest deferral credits you would be eligible to bid.
Okay, and there are a couple here, one from Sarah, one from Phil, related to multiple ownerships. One is 4 separate tracts in 2 separate states. How do you deal with those as a customer success manager?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And it really depends on the specific ownership structure. So I can give kind of a general overview on how we handle it. And then if there are specific questions, please reach out to us and we can spend some time looking at your specific ownership structure. Generally speaking, though, if there are multiple properties that reside under different ownerships, we do require that any individual owner enroll all property under their ownership. Now, for example, if you as a landowner have your own property that is managed and owned entirely by you, there's also an LLC in which you are the majority owner, for example, we would require both of those properties to be enrolled under the same account. If you have your own property and then a divided interest in an LLC, that would need to be enrolled separately because that ownership structure is different than your individual property. The ultimate guidance that we have been sharing is if you as a landowner have the authority to make harvest decisions for that particular parcel, it should likely be enrolled under your existing account or under the account you create for your own property.
There are a couple specific questions. One is anonymous attendee wonders how many credits a typical Southern Appalachian hardwood forest would have per acre. I don't know if you've seen enough of those studies to have that in your mind. Earlier, you said that less than 200 acre tracts brought 100 to as much as $2,000 for the whole tract.
Right.
Is that an indication?
So that kind of articulates the range that we have seen for, in that example, landowners who have less than 200 acres. It's difficult to say how many harvest deferral credits would be assessed for that particular property without knowing the details of the property, such as like what tree species are there, what previous harvest activity has been done, what's the proximity to mills. So it's difficult to give a concrete number what I would recommend would be to just create an account with us, upload your property information, and then our eligibility report will provide an overview of our assessment, how many acres were enrolled, how many acres were deemed eligible, and then the number of harvest deferral credits that were assessed based on our evaluation of both risk and inventory.
That's great, Lillian. Dennis asks, what is the current market price of a carbon deferral credit, for instance, for pine? And I know this is ongoing. You could maybe talk about how that's arrived at in the cycle.
Sure, absolutely. So for our 21B participants, the market clearing price was determined to be $17 per harvest deferral credit. So landowners would be paid that amount per credit bid. One thing to caveat is, as part of our seller agreement, if you submit a bid in this example at $10 per harvest deferral credit, and the market clearing price was determined to be $17, you will be paid that $17 that the market clearing price warranted, because that demand was such that it required a higher harvest deferral rate. We do expect the price to go down a bit for 21C participants because we expanded into hardwood markets, and through the expansion of our program, we brought more supply into the market relative to our 21B cycle. We haven't yet finalized our auction for 21C, so I don't have a concrete number for that cycle specifically, but 21B participants, excuse me, were paid $17 per harvest deferral credit bid.
Thank you very much, Lillian. Chris asks another forecasting type question. So
Sure.
If you could reach down and get your globe to look into the future, the crystal ball, do you expect the value of these credits to increase as you move towards certification with Vera or something else?
Yeah, I think that's that would be the best case scenario, right? And that's something that we're certainly hoping for, not only as a company, but for landowners specifically. The goal is, that we continue to see the demand with corporations who have these sustainability targets or are particularly interested in purchasing carbon credits. That increase in demand will further drive up the cost or the price, of the harvest deferral credits that would be paid to landowners. So the long-term goal as we roll out 21D to all landowners in the US, and as we continue to have conversations with these large corporations, is that demand and supply increase in such a way that it does warrant a higher harvest deferral credit price for those landowners.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions that came in, like this one from Robert. With the USDA suggesting they may pay landowners for CRP or carbon sequestration, how do those governmental programs or conservation easements, as were mentioned in another question, affect the eligibility for NCX contract or other things? Maybe you can repeat some of the things you said earlier.
Sure. Yeah, and this is actually a pretty frequent question that we get from landowners who have either previously enrolled in CRPs or interested in potentially participating. So generally speaking, the CRPs are already restricting timber harvest activity on that property. In those examples, since harvesting is already being restricted, there would be no eligibility to participate in NCX. There have been some instances where landowners have only enrolled a portion of their property in a CRP. And in those instances, all of the acres not part of the conservation easement would be eligible to participate in our program and eligible for harvest deferral credits.
Excellent, Lillian. We're about 15 minutes out from our closing, so to give you an idea, we still got 36 open questions. So
All right.
I'll try to pace yourself so you don't explode. But this question, maybe you can relate it back to what you do and your customer folks. But do you have personal representatives that work directly with landowners? Asks Mark.
As personal representatives, I'd be interested, Mark, are you referring to consulting foresters or some other type of representative?
I'm just guessing for the other Mark, but I would expect that or suspect he may be asking about NCX employees.
Oh, okay. So do we have other representatives who work with landowners?
Personal.
On our
personal.
team?
Who will work with them personally, I suspect.
So the way our Landowner Success team is designed is both myself and other members of the team. Alex McIntosh, he leads up our Landowner Success team. We have a gentleman named Jeff Wright who leads up our key accounts. And then myself and our newest team member, Catherine Morse, are both customer success managers. Catherine and I predominantly manage the day-to-day operations and interactions with landowners who have any kind of specific questions about our program, their property, or the enrollment process. So that's kind of how we're designed to date. But we have grown pretty significantly over the last couple of years. So we may have a few more customer success managers by the end of the year.
So here's another anonymous question, but I think it's on the minds of many folks.
Sure.
This is a voluntary program, and we haven't made a distinction between voluntary and compliance markets. But this questioner asked, are there government regulators that oversee your compliance of additionality and other standards program? And is the compliance violation a risk on you, I think NCX or the landowner proper? Who bears the risk is one question, and then how and if how are you regulated?
Sure. So this one I may end up taking offline just to get some other folks to weigh in on in case I'm not entirely answering this question with all of the information at our disposal, but we are working, as I mentioned, with VERA, who is a third-party standards institute, on certifying our methodology. We have already gotten approval for our concept note, so that's really like the backbone of what NCX was designed around. We're still working on getting all of the other pieces to the certifications approval ironed out, but we are working with VERA on getting the certification. As far as risk is concerned, I would say that it's on both NCX as a company as well as the landowners. So if a landowner, for example, bids a certain number of harvest deferral credits and they're not able to deliver on that for any reason, if a landowner delivers less than 95% of the harvest deferral credits that were bid, they will be paid a reduced dollar amount per harvest deferral credit. So I believe the reduction is a 2% reduction in the payments issued. That is anything below 95%. If you deliver less than 47.5%, that then NCX would not issue payments at all. This is then because we are now responsible for sourcing carbon credits either from other landowners or other methodologies to help ensure we are able to meet the commitments that we made with corporations. So I think that the risk falls on both parties. The landowner, worst case scenario is they're not going to be paid if they deliver less than 47.5%. But NCX as a company then has to find those carbon credits that weren't delivered, source them in some other way to make sure that we are maintaining our commitments with the companies that we're working with.
I've got another question that you probably have not seen before. Does this, Warren asks, does this program allow orchard growers for nut crops like pecans or walnuts or pecans if you're from somewhere else to enroll? And does that land use change any aspects of the program?
That's a great question, and not one that I have gotten yet. I think that it would depend on any previous harvest activity and if those orchards would fall under the tree species that we currently support. So right now, NCX program supports both pines and hardwoods, but I'm assuming any orchard species may fall under a different categorization. In that instance, they would not register or be included in our assessment with having any eligible harvest deferral credits. Then I think the other piece to that is, did any previous harvest activity occur on that land, because our assessment evaluates both risk and inventory. So any previous harvest activity would fall under that risk category. I can take that one offline. I haven't gotten that question before, but it may be one that we continue to see a little bit more frequently as this program kind of expands into other states. So I can certainly circle back once I get confirmation on that.
So I would venture to guess that it would be tough to show a market demand for some of the standing timber related to nut crops. And that would probably be somewhere in your formula, just based on how I've heard others answer that. But let's put that one on the shelf and get to a leakage question if you'd like.
Sure.
And this one you may have to go back to the drawing boards, but do you foresee leakage occurring for the repeatable, sizable harvest deferrals? And how is NCX accounting for this? So leakage, I guess, for the crowd is the idea that if you defer harvest on one piece of ground, it will just find, the buyers will find a harvest somewhere else. And does that shift outside the region or anyway, how does that calculus work, if you know?
Yeah, this is a question that we've seen a little bit from landowners in the past, and NCX tries to minimize leakage on two fronts. One, on the individual landowner, and then the second within the landscape as a whole. So to account for leakage or try to minimize leakage on the owner's side of things, we try to accomplish that by requiring landowners to enroll all of their property. That helps us understand where all of their property resides, because what you don't want to happen is kind of like what you said, Mark, if a landowner only enrolls one of two of their properties and they submit a bid to defer harvest, but then clear cut their other property that they didn't enroll, NCX would have no way of knowing that. And so that is part of why we require landowners to enroll all of their property, even if they're not going to defer harvest across the board, to help minimize that potential leakage. On the landscape side, the way we try to minimize leakage is first and foremost making our program available to landowners, to all landowners. to make sure that there is no barrier to entry. We then also acknowledge that it's not possible across a landscape to completely eliminate leakage. And therefore, we account for that in our methodology when we transfer harvest deferral credits into tangible credits. So that is something that's accounted for in our methodology to address leakage across the landscape.
Okay, Lillian, we're looking at the clock now, and there's about 5 minutes left. So let's get back to a money question, which Mike asks. You said participants receive less than $100 to $2,000 for their full tracts. And he wonders, is that a per ton, per acre, or some other measure?
So the measure that we use is harvest deferral credits. And we use that because one harvest deferral credit is equivalent to about 20 ton years, which is the number of, let me backtrack. So we use harvest deferral credits as part of our assessment. One harvest deferral credit is equivalent to about 20 ton years, which is the amount of carbon that would need to be retained on the landscape for a 1-year period, which is the duration of our contract term, to equate to 1 metric ton of CO2 being removed from the atmosphere over the course of 100 years. So our harvest deferral credit is the unit that we use to assess a property and determine how many credits a landowner is eligible to bid to have the same impact in a much shorter period of time. In this example, the annual contract term. So our harvest deferral credits do not 100% equate to a per acre or a per species kind of ratio.
And that looks like it tackles a second question from Mike, which was the conversion factor from a harvest credit to tons of CO2 equivalent. And you're saying it's a comparable amount that occurs in 1 year, the time of your duration, versus the other compliance market where it would be 100 years impact of taking out that 1 ton of carbon.
Yes, yeah, that's correct, Mark.
All right, well, that just burned another 3 minutes. So now we're down to 2. I'm going to wrap up with 1 or 2 questions if you have time. Let's see. Sure. This one. If someone applied, Bob asks, if I applied on your former enrollment site, is the information transferred if I re-enroll? Is it one in the same site, I guess?
Yeah, so what happens if you enrolled in a previous cycle and want to participate in a future cycle is the property information that you uploaded is still going to be associated to the NCX account that you created. However, because our assessment looks at risk and inventory, what you would need to do is request an updated eligibility report so that we can rerun our assessment. It may, if it was just 21B compared to 21C, there may just be some small changes, but we do require landowners to request an updated eligibility report before they're able to submit a seller agreement.
Okay, so I will take the questioner's prerogative. And thank you, Lillian, for answering 12 of the 45 open questions that we have. And that does not include the many that are in the chat that we'll try to capture. So we're going to do our best. I'm going to kick it back to Liz. Thank you, and let folks know that they'll be a recording of this and what the process is for updating that. And Liz?
Great. Well, a big thank you to Lillian and NCX for taking the time to share this program with us and to answer all those many questions. There were some very good questions. A lot of them referred to are this or that eligible, different species or different types of land or not. I'll remind you that Lillian did say that this is no risk and no cost to sign up your acreage and get an assessment report. So that might be the route that you want to take, is to go ahead and input your property that you're not sure if it's eligible and see how it comes back, what their assessment is of whether there's enough carbon on it. A reminder, we'll be sending out a recording of this in a few days, as well as a brief survey. I want to, on behalf of the National Woodland Owners Association, the Walnut Council, and the Indiana Forestry and Woodland Owners Association, I want to thank you for your participation and have a great afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you.